good morning. It's great to be here with you. And it's great to get an opportunity to help frame the topic of discussion for today on the economic impact of violence against women in Tennessee. Violence against women is epidemic. From 2004 to 2010, Tennessee has climbed from 7th, 2004, to 5th in 2006, and now to 3rd in 2010 in the nation in the number of women who are murdered by men each year. 94% of that number were murdered by a male that they knew, and 65% of that number were wives or intimate partners of their killers. Nationwide, more female homicides are committed by firearms than by any other weapon, and studies show that in male on female homicides, guns do not save lives but take them. According to the CDC's 2010 National Intimate Partner in Violence Survey, and on average, 24 people per minute are victims of stalking, rape, or physical violence by an intimate partner. TBI reports that over a total of over 161,000 crimes against persons were reported last year. We're 3rd behind Nevada and South Carolina. These are the Group A offenses. That the numbers are just staggering, but when we move to the next slide, then we see half of these numbers are still alarming. This slide shows is another version of the same, of the earlier one. The next slide shows that there is a disproportionate number of men versus women, of male to female offenders. A comparison of 2012 with the 2011 TBI crime reports show that aggravated assaults increased by 7.7% in 2012, and murder rates increased by 1.6%. It's not surprising that the CDC reports that occurrences of domestic violence have spread from 1 in 4 families to 1 in 3 families. The facts are grim and the statistics are staggering. As Carolyn Maloney mentioned in a recent Senate speech, the numbers are all real, and the tragedies are as well that are behind them. The body count is indisputable. The pain and the suffering and the losses are all hard to bear. Tim O'Brien's 1990 novel, The Things They Carried, speaks eloquently about bearing heavy loads. In his collection of stories that reflect on and make sense of his experience in Vietnam, he reminds us that we do not have to bear this or any burden alone. Of his men in his troop, he writes, quote, "Every 3rd or 4th man carried a Claymore anti-personnel mine, 3.5 pounds with its firing device. They all carried fragmentation grenades, 14 ounces each. They all carried at least one M18 colored smoke grenade, 24 ounces. Some carried CS or tear gas grenades. Some carried white phosphorus grenades. They carried all they could bear, and then some, including a silent awe for the terrible power of the things they carried." The things they carried serves as an appropriate metaphor to frame our discussion today. O'Brien's collection of stories asks us to share the load with him, to help him carry his burden, a burden that is part of our collective inheritance, part of our memory, and part of our responsibility as Americans. Today, I want to follow O'Brien's lead and frame our discussion of violence against women in terms of the violence women carry, or as O'Brien might challenge us to rephrase, the violence we carry collectively, the violence we carry together. While studies show that intimate partner violence disproportionately victimizes women, it affects us all. Today's hearing offers us the opportunity to continue the discussion about the economic impact of that violence and to find ways to shoulder the burden together. To frame the discussion, I would like to share with you 3 stories that demonstrate the violence real women carry and illustrate the sobering impact that violence has on our total lives. Even though this evidence is going to be anecdotal, the stories are true and are used with permission from 2 therapists who shared them with me as I interviewed them in preparation for this talk. Let's begin. Story number 1, the violence that Laura carries. Laura's story. Laura is a newly minted American literature graduate and first-year teacher. At the end of the first week of summer school, she walks into my office, plops down in an overstuffed wing chair, and cries, "I have a problem, but no one will help me." One of Laura's mentor teachers has been sexually harassing her since early September. It's now June, and Laura is depressed, showing symptoms of anxiety, and tells me that she dreads coming to work most mornings. She's not only highly uncomfortable around this person due to his inappropriate comments, but also afraid of him because he openly threatened her progress towards tenure and her job security. She went to see her supervisor, who was sorry that she was in such an unfortunate situation, but explained that the teacher in question has a great deal of power, and there really is nothing that neither one of them can do. At that point, Laura made arrangements to see a therapist, applied for some other teaching positions in the area, and tried to buck up until the year was over. However, during the first week of summer school, one of her students came to see her to seek advice about how to handle the inappropriate behavior of one of her teachers. It was the same person. When her student was threatened, Laura drew the line and sought assistance. However, the assistance was for her student. She did not report her own experience to anyone except the therapist. Neither Laura's experience nor her carrying the burden in silence is all that rare. Nearly 1 in 2 women, and that's 44.6%, experience sexual violence, victimization, other than rape at some point in their lives. This equates to more than 53 million women in the United States, and based on recent census data, practically 1.5 million women in Tennessee. For girls, from the ages of 11 to 16, the situation appears dire, as the UN reports that 83% will be sexually harassed at some time during this 5-year period. Joan's story. Joan joined ROTC her freshman year of college. It was not long, however, until her pride and excitement were crushed. Her troop leader sexually harassed her and eventually raped her. Because ROTC culture is about loyalty, she did not feel she had any recourse against her aggressor, which meant that for 4 years, her perpetrator was her ROTC troop leader. She developed anxiety, suffered panic attacks, exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, had sleep disturbances, and lost motivation, but she did not feel she could report the rape. Instead, she had to carry not only the humiliation of the violation, but also the psychological and physical consequences of the abusive treatment in silence. Joan's story is not entirely unlike many women's stories. 1 in 5 women will be raped at some point in her life. While 51% of female victims are raped by an intimate partner, 40.8% are raped by an acquaintance. Like Joan's story, more than 3/4 of female victims of completed rape were raped before their 25th birthday, with 42.2% experiencing their first completed rape before the age of 18, 29.9% between the years of 11 and 17, and 12.3% at or before age 10. Beverly's story. Beverly meets the man of her dreams at her summer job, dates him all through college, and appears to have a fairy tale wedding. However, when she and Ron return from their honeymoon, the fairy tale abruptly ends. He grows increasingly physically abusive, which has health, psychological, and social consequences for Bev. A series of physical conditions, including recurring bladder infections, gastro disorders, and joint problems, require repeat doctor visits and an increasing number of absences at her work. Ron's abusive treatment irritates a growing low self-esteem that will eventually lead to severe panic attacks and a debilitating depression. After several years of unsuccessful treatment and an increasingly diminished ability to work, Bev seeks and receives full disability. The violence she carried was too heavy for one person to bear alone. Laura, Joan, and Bev, not their real names, of course, illustrate the 1 in 3 women who have experienced stalking, rape, and physical violence by an intimate partner or acquaintance, and their stories demonstrate the violence they have carried. According to the National Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence Survey, nearly 3 in 10 women in the United States have experienced stalking, rape, and physical violence, and have reported at least one impact related to experiencing these or other forms of behavior in the relationship. These impacts, or what they carried, include being fearful, concerned for safety, post-traumatic stress disorder, need for health care, injury, contacting a crisis hotline, need for housing services, need for victims advocate services, need for legal services, and even missed days at work or at school. We can go to the next slide. We know that women who experience rape or stalking by any perpetrator or physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime are more likely to report frequent headaches, chronic pain, difficulty with sleeping, activity limitations, poor physical health, and poor mental health than women who did not, you can go to the next one, who did not experience or have no history with these forms of violence. Women who carry trauma with them are more likely to manifest unhealthy behaviors such as addiction that result in future incarceration. Women who have experienced these forms of violence are also more likely to report having asthma, irritable bowel, diabetes, and a number of other ailments that women who did not experience these forms of violence. In addition to the prevalence of health outcomes, we must be vigilant in documenting injury type related to domestic violence. Data for 2012 alone shows an alarming number of broken bones, internal injuries, lacerations, loss of teeth, even unconsciousness related to domestic violence. But these provide us a resource for planning. Factors beyond whether a person has experienced intimate partner violence are important to measure and understand in order to achieve a more complete picture of the true burden of intimate partner violence. Evidence from several studies suggests that as frequency and severity of violence increases, the impact of violence on the health of victims also becomes increasingly severe. According to the National Intimate Partner Survey, for 2010, the detailed state tables for Tennessee presents lifetime estimates at 40% or nearly 900,000 women who will be victimized by sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence. While this statistic and these numbers are not exact, they do reflect a proportion of people in a given state with a history of sexual violence and intimate partner victimizations. Given the potential for ongoing health and service needs over the lifespan related to victimization, these estimates can help us understand the burden that we carry as a state and help us provide and help us with helpful information for prevention, planning, and response. In addition to these estimates, the newly reauthorized Violence Against Women Act is a distinctly American piece of legislation in that it functions to protect all of the people, regardless of economic status, race, religion, political party, or sexual orientation. The 2013 reauthorization expands the Act's protections to include populations that we know are vulnerable and have been until now without protection, including Native Americans, LGBT victims, and immigrant victims, and includes several provisions to help rape victims, reduce violence on college campuses, and assist human trafficking victims. According to UNC Chapel Hill analysis, in the first 6 years of the Act, it estimated that $14.8 billion was saved in the net averted social cost. This Act is going to be an important piece of the puzzle as we address the economic impact of violence against women in Tennessee. As we study the resources, observations, and insights that emerge from this hearing, we'll want to keep in mind the violence that women carry so that we can construct a platform for real prevention that becomes a model for hope and for healing.